Marcus Reeves was 42 years old, a man who had spent his career structuring the financing for things the rest of the city would stand under for 100 years. He drove a truck that was 8 years old. He wore the same site boots on project walkthroughs that he'd worn since he made senior director, not because he couldn't afford new ones, but because they still had work left in them and he didn't like waste. On the morning of April 3rd, he signed the final documents on a $900 million transit infrastructure deal he had spent 14 months building from a single conversation in a conference room in Singapore. At 8:45 in the morning, the deal closed. At 9:17, his wife, Simone, walked into the office of a family law attorney on the 14th floor of a building 3 miles away and handed over a signed petition for dissolution of their marriage. She had not told him she was going. What she also hadn't told him, what she couldn't have known, was that everything she thought she was walking away from had just changed in ways she would not understand until it was far too late. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The coffee was ready at 5:31 in the morning. Marcus knew this without looking at the clock. He had set the timer the night before, the way he set all timers, calibrated to the work that was coming, not the work that had passed. Site visit at 7. Call with the senior lenders at 9. Final closing documentation review before noon. He didn't know it would be the last morning of 14 months of 5 a.m. starts on that particular project. He just knew there was still more to do. Marcus Reeves had built his career the same way he built everything, in sequence, in order, from the foundation up. His father was a union electrician in Baltimore. His uncle ran a concrete crew. Marcus had grown up understanding that the people who built things were almost never the people whose names appeared on the things. That gap had bothered him from the time he understood it. Not bitterly, professionally. He had decided at 22 that he was going to close it. By 42, he was a senior director of capital projects at an infrastructure development firm called Trident Meridian Partners. His job was to structure the financial architecture of major public-private infrastructure initiatives, transit corridors, utility upgrades, municipal development contracts. The $900 million deal was the Lakeview Transit Corridor Project, a mixed-use commuter and commercial development along the city's southern lakefront. 14 months in the making, 3 government partners, 2 private equity co-investors, and a capital structure Marcus had drafted on a whiteboard in a Singapore hotel suite on a Tuesday evening in February of the previous year. He was not the kind of man who talked about what he was building. Not because he was secretive, because the work was not done yet, and he had learned early that men who described unfinished structures before they were standing were men who had never watched a building fall. He kept his word like it was the only currency that mattered. He didn't know, as he poured his coffee that morning, that Simone had been ready to leave for 11 months, that she had already begun moving things out in increments, one bag at a time, stored at her cousin's apartment across town, that the attorney's number had been in her phone since September. He just knew that the house was quiet in a way it had been quiet for a while, and that he had stopped trying to name what the quiet meant. The morning she put the papers in front of him wasn't the morning of April 3rd. That was the morning she went to the attorney. The morning she handed them to him in person was 3 days before, a Saturday, the last Saturday of March, the morning he came back from a 2-day trip to Chicago to finalize the closing documents. He came in through the side door at 7:40 in the morning. The house smelled like coffee that had been sitting too long. She was standing at the kitchen counter. She was dressed, not in weekend clothes, but in the kind of clothes she wore when she had somewhere specific to go. Her phone was face down on the counter. She set it there when he came in. She had a folder. He noticed that first. A manila folder, the kind from an office supply store, pressed flat on the counter beside her coffee mug, like she'd put it down and hadn't decided yet what to do with her hands. "I need you to sit down," she said. He set his bag down by the door. He sat. She brought the folder over and placed it in front of him. She sat across from him. She didn't open it. "I've been thinking about this for a long time," she said. "I've been trying to find a way to say it without it being cruel, and I've realized there isn't a way. So I'm going to say it clearly." She pushed the folder toward him. "I want to end the marriage." He looked at the folder. He didn't open it. "I need something different," she said. "I've needed it for a long time, and I kept thinking it would change, and it didn't. I'm not saying this is your fault. I'm saying I'm done waiting for things to feel different." He looked up at her. She had more prepared. He could see it in the way she was holding herself, leaning forward slightly, hands flat on the table, the posture of someone who had rehearsed this against a mirror. There was a sentence waiting behind her eyes. The sentence that would explain it, the one that would make it make sense. He didn't ask her to say it. "Who?" he said. The pause lasted exactly 2 seconds. He counted. "That's not what this is about," she said. He understood then that the pause was the answer. He noticed one other thing. She was wearing the bracelet he hadn't seen in a year. A gold one, different from anything he'd given her. He noticed it the way he noticed things. He filed it away the way he filed things, quietly, without deciding yet what it meant. He opened the folder. He read the first page. He closed it. He stood up. "I'll call Walter. I'll call him today." He didn't slam the door. He didn't raise his voice. He picked up his bag and pulled the door closed behind him with the same pressure he used every time, the latch clicking into place the way it always had. He sat in his truck for 4 minutes without reaching for his phone. He looked at the house, the porch he'd rebuilt over 2 weekends in the summer of 2021, the gutters he'd cleaned last November, the side path he'd relaid with stone 3 springs ago. He looked at all of it the way a man looks at a set of plans when something in the load-bearing structure doesn't add up. He picked up the phone. He had a call at 9. 6 years before that Saturday, Marcus had driven 4 states to help Simone move her first event planning equipment from her mother's garage in Raleigh to the commercial space she just signed a lease on. He took 2 vacation days and a personal day he'd been saving for months. He loaded the van himself. He installed the commercial shelving units. He ran a new extension panel in the back room because the outlet configuration was wrong for her equipment needs, and he wasn't going to leave her with something that would fail. He wrote the first check for her business filing fees. He reviewed her first vendor contracts because she asked him to, and because he had always been the kind of man who read the fine print on things that mattered. He helped her build the business the way he helped build everything. Not loudly, not in a way she needed to thank him for, but structurally. Underneath where it counted, the year she landed her first corporate account, a repeat event and catering contract worth $120, zeros annually. She had called him from the parking lot of the client's office. He had heard something in her voice that he hadn't heard in a while, something bright, something that had forgotten to be careful. He hadn't told anyone how much of that outcome he'd worked to make possible. It wasn't his story to tell. 3 years into the marriage, he had started noticing the phone she angled away from him when it buzzed on the coffee table. He'd noticed it the way he noticed things on job sites, not with alarm but with the quiet, certain recognition of something not sitting flush. He had told himself it was work stress. He had extended the benefit of the doubt because that was what he did. She had mentioned a name once, at dinner in October, about a developer she'd met at a client event, Derek. He was working on a boutique hotel project, she said, something called Summit. She described him as someone who had a vision. She was smiling when she said it, a specific kind of smile, aimed at something past the table. He hadn't said anything about it that night, but he remembered the word. For 3 years, that had been the shape of their marriage, him building in silence, her growing quieter in a different way. He had told himself it was the project, the travel, the years of long hours. He had told himself they would find their way back to each other on the other side of it. He didn't know she had already found someone else entirely. By the time she put the folder on the table, he had been alone in that marriage longer than she had. He called Walter Ossie that Sunday morning. Walter was the kind of attorney who built cases the way Marcus built project financials, from the ground up, in order, starting with what could be verified before he touched what couldn't. He called early. His voice never changed when the information was heavy. Walter listened without interrupting. He was quiet for a moment after Marcus finished. "Don't move a single account," Walter said. "Don't sign anything she sends. Don't contact anyone she might warn. And call Celestine. Tell her I said it's time." Marcus hadn't spoken to Celestine Harper in 6 months, but when he called, she picked up on the second ring. Celestine Harper was 63 years old. She had been a senior paralegal at a tax and estate law firm for 31 years before she retired. Small, straight-backed, silver hair kept pulled back, reading glasses on a chain at her collarbone. He had met her 4 years earlier when she was consulting on a contract review for Trident Meridian. She had liked him immediately. In the practical way, she liked people who didn't require explanation. She had also, in those 4 years, watched certain things and said nothing about them, because he hadn't asked, because the time wasn't right, because evidence is only useful at the moment when it can be used. "Come over," she said. "Eat first, then we'll talk." She had a dining room table that disappeared under organized paper when she worked. By the time Marcus arrived at 11 that morning, the table had already begun to go. "I'm going to tell you what I saw," she said, "and then I'm going to show you what I kept. I need you to let me get through all of it before you say anything." He nodded. What she had seen over the previous 18 months, she had seen because she'd been retained to assist with a secondary document review on a municipal permitting matter, and in the course of that work, certain public filings had crossed her desk that she had not expected to see. The first document she placed in front of him was a refinancing instrument. It was dated August 14th of the previous year, 3 weeks after Marcus had left for his 8-week trip to Singapore and New York for the final stage of the Lakeview deal. The property was the house on Carver Street. The equity drawn $181,000. The signature authorizing the transaction. Marcus Reeves by power of attorney. He hadn't authorized it. He hadn't known about it. He did not push back from the table. He did not stand up. He looked at the document for a long time. Then he folded his hands in front of him and said nothing. Celestine placed the second document. It was an operating agreement for a limited liability company called Summit Creative Partners, LLC, filed in the state in September of the previous year. Managing members, Simone Reeves and Derek A. Whitmore. He looked at the name of the company. He looked at it for 3 full seconds. He was thinking about a dinner in October, about a word she had used while smiling at something past the table, about a gold bracelet he hadn't seen in a year. He had seen that bracelet before. He had seen it on her wrist the evening in November when she came home 2 hours later than she said she would, and he had noticed and said nothing. He had filed it away. He had not decided yet what it meant. Now he knew what it meant. The third document Celestine placed was a forensic accounting summary she had prepared herself, cross-referenced against Summit Creative Partners' filing history, Derek Whitmore's prior business ventures, and the equity drawdown timeline. The $181,000 had moved in 2 transfers 11 days apart. Both had arrived in the Summit Creative Partners operating account. From there, $112 had been used to service construction debt on a boutique hotel project in the city's East Corridor. The project was called the Summit Hotel, Derek Whitmore's project, the one that had been bleeding cash since the previous spring. Marcus stood. He walked to Celestine's kitchen window and looked out at the street for a long moment. Then he came back to the table. He looked at all 3 documents together, not one at a time, all of them. He stood over them the way he stood over blueprints on a job site, not reading any single piece, looking at all of it together, feeling where the lines connected. The refinancing, the LLC, the hotel, the name. He could see the whole shape of it. "All right," he said. Celestine reached over and refilled his coffee. He didn't move fast. That was the part she had never been able to account for. She had spent 11 months deciding exactly what kind of man he was. The steady one, the predictable one, the one who would show up but not expand, who would provide but never surprise. She had decided he was someone she could leave and remain ahead of. She had been wrong about the most important thing. She had mistaken patience for the absence of capability. It wasn't. Patience was his most practiced skill. It was just the one she'd never had reason to watch him use. Walter Ossie took the documents on Monday morning. He called Marcus at 7:04 a.m. on Tuesday, his voice even the entire call. The power of attorney was valid. The application was not, Walter said. The drawdown occurred without explicit transaction authorization and without your knowledge or consent. There's significant civil fraud exposure here. I'm bringing in a forensic accountant to trail the full financial record for the marriage period. In the meantime, don't move anything. Don't contact Whitmore. Don't alter anything around her that could look like reaction. Can you do that? Yes, Marcus said. How long have you been able to do that? A while, Marcus said. He filed for divorce 2 days after Simone did. Walter handled the paperwork. The filings crossed each other in the county clerk's office on the same Thursday afternoon, which Marcus thought had a certain architectural neatness to it. In the 6 weeks that followed, Simone's attorney reached out twice with proposed settlement terms. The terms assumed Marcus would accept the division of marital assets as disclosed in her filing, which did not reference the refinanced equity, did not mention the LLC, and listed the house on Carver Street at a valuation that had not been updated since 2021. Walter responded both times with procedural acknowledgments. He did not show the documents yet. Marcus went to work every day. He attended the final Lakeview closing preparation meetings. He reviewed the capital structure. He signed what needed signing. He ate lunch at his desk. He called his mother on Sundays. He did not post anything. He did not confide in mutual contacts. He did not change his expression at the charity dinner in late February, where Simone arrived with Derek Whitmore on her arm and stood on the other side of the room with the posture of someone who had recently won something. She glanced at Marcus once across the room, a quick, calibrated look, and then looked elsewhere. He noted the look. He filed it. He turned back to the conversation he was having and finished it. The forensic accountant Walter retained, a man named Prescott who worked exclusively with attorneys and communicated almost entirely in spreadsheets, had the full financial trace completed in 3 weeks. The $181,000 was not the whole of it. There was a secondary credit account opened in Marcus's name the previous October, $34,000 drawn against it, payments missed from January onward. There was a vehicle lease transferred out of the marital estate without disclosure. There was a pattern of transfers from Simone's business accounts into Summit Creative Partners, beginning in the same month she had retained her divorce attorney. The total unauthorized financial exposure, when all out on Walter's conference table, was $317,000. Walter called Simone's attorney that afternoon. His voice was even. He said Marcus had reviewed the proposed settlement terms and believed a meeting of all parties would be useful. He said Marcus was interested in resolving this without extended litigation. Simone called Marcus that evening. He let it ring twice. "I think that's the right approach," she said. Her voice had the quality of someone filing paperwork for a result that had already been decided. She sounded the way she sounded when a corporate event contract came through, a quiet, managed confidence, already planning the next thing. "I agree," he ended the call. Celestine was sitting across his kitchen table, her mug held in both hands. She hadn't said anything through the whole call. "She thinks it's already over," Marcus said. Celestine said nothing. She refilled his coffee. Marcus arrived at the offices of Walter & Associates at 18:14 in the morning. The meeting was scheduled for 9. He liked it that way. The conference room was on the 34th floor, neutral walls, a long table, dark wood. The city was visible through a full wall of glass to the east, the lakefront, and if you looked south far enough, the strip of corridor where the Lakeview project's preliminary groundwork had already begun. His project, his name on the capital structure, his 14 months. He sat with his back to the window. Walter arrived at 8:30, Prescott at 8:47. They arranged the documents in 3 folders, color-coded in order, and placed them at the center of the table. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that precedes something that cannot be undone. Simone arrived at 9:02 with her attorney, Holloway, a compact man who had presumably reviewed her settlement disclosures and found nothing concerning. They came through the conference room door together. She came in ahead. She moved with the deliberate ease of someone who believed the outcome was already understood, a meeting to confirm what was settled, not to decide what wasn't. She scanned the room. She noted Walter. She noted Prescott. She looked at Marcus once, a quick professional assessment, and then oriented toward Holloway, as though Marcus were simply another person in the room. Her expression was composed. She had prepared for this the way she prepared for major client presentations, with structure, with timing, with a narrative already built. Walter opened at 9:06. "Thank you both for coming. Before any discussion of settlement terms, there are several matters that require acknowledgement by all parties." He opened the first folder without haste. "Want to start with the property at 1404 Carver Street." He placed the refinancing instrument on the table. Holloway picked it up first. He read it. He set it down with a kind of careful neutrality that was itself a signal. "On August 14th of last year," Walter said, "while Mr. Reeves was traveling on extended work assignment, a home equity refinancing was executed at 1404 Carver Street using a power of attorney that was not granted for this purpose and was not used with Mr. Reeves's authorization or knowledge. The transaction drew $181,000 from the marital estate. He let the number settle. A civil fraud action has already been filed." Simone's expression had not changed, or rather, she had worked to keep it from changing, and the effort was visible to anyone watching closely enough. Marcus was watching closely enough. Prescott placed the second document. "This is the operating agreement for Summit Creative Partners, LLC," Walter continued, his voice the same temperature it had been when he started. "Filed September of last year. Managing members, Simone Reeves and Derek A. Whitmore." A pause. The $181,000 from the Carver Street refinancing moved to the Summit Creative Partners operating account in two transfers, $90 on August 26th, $91,000 on September 6th. He let the sequence stand for a moment. Those funds were subsequently used to service construction debt on the Summit Hotel, a development project in which Mr. Whitmore is the principal. Holloway was reading. He had stopped looking at his client. Prescott placed the third document. Walter's voice didn't change. "What we are not doing today is making criminal allegations. What we are doing is disclosing that this documentation exists, that has been fully preserved, that a civil fraud action has been filed, and that the financial disclosure submitted by Ms. Reeves in support of her proposed settlement terms is materially incomplete in three separate categories." He folded his hands on the table. "We'll allow a few minutes for your team to review." The silence in the room lasted 11 seconds. Marcus counted them. Something moved across Simone's face. Not fear exactly, but the specific expression of a person watching a structure they had believed was solid. Understand that it was built on a foundation they had never inspected. Recognition first, then the rapid calculation of what recognition meant, then something that looked like the floor shifting beneath her. She looked at Marcus for the first time since she'd walked in. He stood. He gathered nothing from the table. Everything he had brought was Walter's folders, and it had done its work. He buttoned his jacket. He shook Walter's hand. He shook Prescott's hand. He walked toward the door. He stopped in the doorway. He turned back to Simone. He said it quietly. Not for Holloway or Walter or Prescott. For her. Because it was meant for her. "You stopped asking what I was building 14 months ago," he said. "I kept building it anyway." He walked out without looking back. It did not happen all at once. The civil fraud action moved through the system over the following 7 months. The settlement, when it came, was not the one Simone had proposed. The $317,000 in unauthorized exposure was fully accounted for. The house on Carver Street was included in the corrected asset division at its actual current value. Summit Creative Partners, LLC, without the capital that had been propping its operating account, had fewer options than it had the previous autumn. The Summit Hotel project, already over-leveraged, completed a forced sale of its primary asset the following spring at a loss that ended Derek Whitmore's involvement in it permanently. Simone's events business held its clients for a while. Then it held fewer. Some of the corporate accounts she had relied on had come through relationships Marcus had cultivated long before she understood that was what they were. Those connections went quiet the way connections go quiet when the person who built them is no longer in the picture, not with hostility, just with the calm gravity of things reorganizing around where the weight actually was. She was not publicly ruined. She was not destroyed dramatically. She was simply reduced to the life her choices had built. She was carrying the weight of what she had chosen the way a person carries something they cannot set down, not dramatically, just constantly. Marcus was building something, not fast, the way he built everything. The Lakeview Corridor project broke ground that September. His name was in the project documentation on the capital structure. It was in the announcement in the business section. It was on the hard hat he wore to the groundbreaking, a new one because the occasion called for it, though he kept the old one on the passenger seat of his truck. He promoted 2 people on his team in the 18 months that followed. He hired a third. He gave accurate timelines and he hit them. He answered every call the same day. 14 months after the 34th floor, a second project came across his desk. Different city, different scale, even larger. He read the brief on a Tuesday morning at 5:31 with his thermos on the desk beside him, and felt the same specific thing he'd felt the first time he read the Lakeview brief, the quiet, certain recognition of a problem he knew exactly how to solve. He had a plant on the windowsill of his office. Celestine had brought it the previous winter in a terracotta pot with no card. Just the plant. He had set it in the window where it got morning light. He watered it on Thursdays. It was doing well. On an evening in late October, Marcus Reeves stood on a job site at the southern end of the lakefront corridor. The sun was going down behind the city. The steel framework of the first structure was up. Clean lines, load-bearing elements in sequence, the way they were always supposed to go. He had a hard hat on and a rolled set of plans he'd been carrying since morning. He stopped at the edge of the foundation and looked out at what was there. The water, the skyline to the north. The cranes on the south end, quiet for the evening, pointed upward like something patient. His name was on the drawings, his structure, his sequencing. He thought about the man who had sat in a truck on a Saturday morning and looked at a house he'd built and felt something in the load-bearing structure that didn't add up. He thought about everything that man had eventually understood. He put on his hard hat and walked toward the work. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.